But something I do want to ask is, everybody who's in this weird tribe of seekers, these people who are drawn to look for these answers that most people don't care about, as we all know, it's just something that's just in you, right? It's just like very young, you just feel this call. And so as somebody who has invested so much time and energy into exploring this and has brought this wisdom back for us, which I personally appreciate, if you're talking to a younger person who's earlier on the journey, what would you say to them as they're beginning to explore these strange questions? What would you say to them as advice to maybe expedite their journey, or to just give them some an emotional oasis as they go into this weird wilderness?
Okay, well, I can answer that and allude to the book at the same time. The book is broken out in 3 parts: Bell, Book, and Candle. In the Bell, we are answering the call as an initiate, the young person, the fool, okay, who decides he's going to set out on this path as an adventure. And he really doesn't know much. He's oblivious to what's going on. And if you're familiar with the tarot, it's the 0 card, okay, which is never ending. So, the fool, the young person, is answering the call, answering the bell to go out and to begin his seeking. Whether it's a quixotic quest or not, well, that's always to be determined. As he progresses down this road, it begins to narrow. And the path just increasingly narrows as he seeks knowledge. It becomes more and more difficult to find. The road becomes rougher. It becomes treacherous. He encounters folks along the way that don't like what he has learned thus far. They don't like what he's doing, going out and asking questions and is searching for knowledge. So the young man has, been reading a lot, not just a book, but many books in his quest for knowledge. And he's learned so far that he must be circumspect. He has to be very cautious with whom he shares his knowledge with and whom he discusses these things with. So you begin as a fool, you oblivious to all the dangers, but as you progress down this narrowing road, you learn pretty quickly that, well, I need to pay attention. I need to be careful because incidents happen, and if you're not careful, they could end your life one way or another. But for those that continue along this ever narrowing, increasingly difficult, steep, and rocky path up to the top of the mountain, you'll find that there's a hermit up there holding a lantern up high, the number 9 card in the tarot deck. And he's just trying to shine a light, for these young men that are coming along the path, regardless of where they're at along the path, just to show a light saying, hey, you're at the top of the mountain. No, it's the mountain of knowledge. And the light that he's showing is the wisdom that can be attained once you get there. It's, the flower of wisdom that Charles taught me to seek up on the mountain.
Greetings, my friends. My next guest is an intrepid explorer of worlds physical and metaphysical. A spiritual philosopher and psychonaut that has traversed mystical schools ranging from Freemasonry to Native American shamanism. His name is R.E. Kretz, and he has returned from his forays into the fantastic with secret treasures to share. Today we're talking about his book, The Alchemical Search for the Unified Field, Pythagorean, Hermetic, and Shamanic Journeys into Invisible and Ethereal Realms. The book is as ambitious as it sounds, containing a truly baffling array of fascinating information and insights. It's dense with information and warrants multiple readings and close study. More than anything else, It digs into seemingly random and sometimes baffling spiritual practices and explains where the concepts came from and what their ancient, forgotten purposes were supposed to be. So, let's get into it. With no further ado, here's my conversation with R.E. Kretz.
Well, and that's the whole premise, is a lot of folks, they're interested, they don't understand, and they are told they have to do things, but not why.
Right.
They don't understand the operational mechanics behind it. So that was the premise of my book. Say, hey, okay, this is really how it works and why you have to do the things that you're doing. And then once you understand that, you can practice it and benefit from it.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's perfect, man. Now we can just get right into it. Because what I wanted to say for the introduction to the interview is that I read books in the esoteric, philosophical field, however you want to phrase it, all the time. I get sent books by publishers asking me to interview their authors. And man, there are few books that I have found that have the scope, the pure scope and ambition of this book. It's truly, I'm saying this for the benefit of the viewers and the listeners, like it's truly astounding. And it's not a huge book, but I'm a relatively intelligent guy, and I'm going to have to return to this multiple times. I mean that in a good sense, because there's so much information in this and in the paper that you shared. The paper is phenomenal. But before we get into this, I want to read one passage from your book for the audience's benefit, because I think it's beautifully written. And I think it gives a good intro into the spirit of this book, because even though it's technically demanding and kind of philosophically demanding, there's a lot of heart in it. It's obvious what you're trying to do is I can feel your intent of trying to open the doors for people and get people to step into this other world. And just this passage. So page 125. There is a flower growing high up on a mountain. This mountain is steep and it is dangerous. This mountain is sacred. She is old and has a strong spirit. She will test you harshly. You must show her respect. You must show her that you are brave and strong of spirit. If you are strong of spirit and respect her, she may share her secrets. Many have gone to this mountain. Few survive her. Fewer still return to sing their tales of exploration and adventure. If you are duly and truly prepared in your heart, then go to this mountain, seek this flower. And then the preceding paragraph, before you begin, turn your gaze inward, ask yourself, what is it I seek? Why do I seek it? How will I recognize it? Where might I find it? What will I do with it? Visualize your answer, picture it in your mind. So I love that passage. And I thought it's, for any viewers out there, anybody who wants to check out this book that is more technically demanding than most of the stuff coming out, I think that passage just gives a great example of why it's worthwhile and the heart behind it, because it's not just all technical stuff, right? So to the viewers, when I say the scope of this book is extraordinary, because it's not even just about alchemy. It's not even just about shamanism. You go into enlightenment, what the real third eye is, time travel, Paris panspermia. Like, it's incredible, man. So that's my intros. I want people to get into this, man. So now could you please give a little bit, I know this is difficult because it's such a broad book, but the core thesis, the core spirit of the book, could you elucidate that a little bit?
Well, in a nutshell, really what I'm trying to do is exemplify a union of opposites. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, we're left-brained and right-brained. Left brain is usually considered the masculine aspect. Right brain is the feminine. And when we're practicing occultism or esoteric stuff, we try to get really technical. And that's what you find in the second part of the book when I'm discussing alchemy. It's very technical. It's very left brain. It's masculine. But then when we shift gears and we go to the third part of the book and discuss shamanism, it's very nature oriented. It's right brain. It's very feminine. And the whole idea that if we really want to attain a higher level of consciousness enlightenment is the word people like to focus on. We have to have that union of opposites. So it's just like an electrical system, and that's why I discuss meditation, because within an electrical system, you have your hot lead, you've got your I'm having a brain cramp here, the black wire, the white wire, and then you have a green wire, which is your neutral. It takes everything to ground. So you've got positive, negative, and ground. And that's how our nervous system works. It's how our brain works. You know, left and right hemispheres of the brain are positive and negative. The spinal cord, where our ganglia are, is a neutral. It's the ground, and it runs from our brain stem all the way down to our coccyx. And as we had been discussing previously, you know, as an electrical circuit, if you're going to meditate properly to benefit from it, that's why we have to be grounded. Sitting on the ground directly, or in a straight back chair, barefooted, so that we are receiving the benefits of being grounded, that our body's electrical circuit is able to close and be complete, and therefore we can begin to harmonize using a mantra or a prayer.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that. And, you know, in that part about the we're going to come back to the part about the shamanism in the mountain, because that's just some beautiful stuff, man. I love your relationship there, and it's really neat stuff. But so one of the driving forces for you was your time in Freemasonry, correct? And you came to understand that a lot of these people, most of these people, didn't know why they were doing anything that they did, and that this is kind of something that expands out into just the alternative spiritual sphere, esoteric, whatever you want to call it. People are doing things without understanding why. And that was like a motivation for this book, right?
Very much. That was the inspiration for the book, really, the motivation, in that whether it's within Masonry, another esoteric initiatic order, folks that are just interested in the occult or whatever, they will go through rituals. They will do things in a certain way, hoping to attain an end through that means, whether it's actually performance of actions or it is a chant, you know, saying specific words in a certain way. Those things are great. But if you don't have that understanding of why you're doing it, you know, what are the operational mechanics behind it? So how is it working? How is saying a certain prayer or doing some ritualistic actions going to invoke an outcome? That's what I was trying to explain. And I had so many questions when I first went into Freemasonry. You know, I was like a lot of other folks. I figured, well, you know, I'm going to go into Freemasons, and yeah, it's all this hocus pocus stuff. You know, I'm going to learn all these great secrets, and it's going to be fantastic, you know, really cool. And I get in there, and there's these guys that are truly ancient, you know, that, you know, are, you know, in their 70s and 80s. And that's wonderful. I have a lot of respect for them. But they were very entrenched in their attitudes, beliefs, and values in the way they had done things, and quite inflexible. And so they weren't really open to change. They weren't open to being questioned. And part of the reason behind that discomfort was they didn't have the answers. They didn't know themselves. So, you know, I got really frustrated. And you'll find a lot of young guys will get involved in Masonry just like I did, you know, hoping that they're going to really learn something special. And in a pretty short time, they're disappointed and they don't go back. So my idea was that if I had all these questions and these challenges, you and your audience and so many other people out there were experiencing the same thing. So who's going to provide the answers to them? Well, it was up to me. I'd spent many years, researching and trying to find out what are these secrets, understanding symbolism, understanding allegory, and trying to bring it all together to say, okay, well, here's the tip of the iceberg. So if you're traveling this path, at least now you have a little bit of light. You have the beginnings of the understanding for the operational mechanics of how this is work, the way that, our forebears thought, what was the rationale behind all this? And it's not just that it's supposed to work, it's actually, how does it work? And if we're not following the right procedures, we don't have an understanding of it, then how can we derive any benefit if we're doing it incorrectly? Does that make sense to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so a core part of the book is it's basically the four essential uses of the Philosopher's Stone, and or what the Philosopher's Stone actually was. And in one of those was meditation, right? As the pathway to enlightenment. Could you expand on that one a little bit for people who haven't read the book?
Right. Well, what the Alchemical Search for the Unified Field touches on is only one aspect of the Philosopher's Stone. As you've mentioned, there are, what I've been able to discern, are four other aspects of it. I don't delve into those in this book. All I'm looking at is using the Philosopher's Stone as a vehicle to attain a higher level of consciousness. So again, we're looking at the body as an electrical system, but what is the stone itself? And we have to know what the stone is in order to be able to understand how that applies alchemically to our bodies. So this is where enlightenment comes from, spirituality, and the alchemical connection that is driving this is that within alchemy, what we're doing is we take a substance, for example, lead, only it's not pure lead. It has to be galena, which is a lead ore that contains impurities. So the idea is that we would take our galena, we put it in the keratosis, which is like a double burner, and we burn off all the impurities from this galena. And it's going to, vent out some poisonous or noxious gases. And there's going to be some additional substances, so that hopefully at the end of the process, we find that we have the element of lead. The byproducts of the process form an oxidized bullion on the lead itself that contains silver and trace amounts of gold. And that has to be distilled in order to recover it. That's alchemy in a nutshell. So we're doing the same thing spiritually with our bodies when we're meditating. What we have to do is try to burn off our ego, all the superfluities of life, to get rid of all those impurities. And that's how we are trying through meditation to become better than we once were. Because through meditation, it helps to, if you're using a mantra or a chant or using a form of a prayer, what we're trying to do is harmonize our mind, body, and spirit. And so again, it's the same thing as if you're looking at the alchemical process. We're trying to divest ourselves of these impurities so that we can become purer and ultimately better than we were, before that we even began. So that's why meditation plays an important role within the alchemy.
And do you think it's specifically the meditations from the alchemical tradition, or say transcendental meditation, which both of you and I share? We're both TM meditators. Do you think that applies to other forms of meditation, or is it specifically the alchemical approaches?
Well, it does apply to the other, techniques and forms of meditation. What I was just sharing is the background of how it actually works, the operational mechanics of it. And it doesn't really matter, what what technique that you're going to employ to meditate. It's a process that's involved. It's just like in alchemy. It doesn't matter so much whether you're using a copper vessel or a glass vessel, as long as the process and the procedures remain the same.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And and so there's also the part where you talk about the third eye being where the two hemispheres of the brain, like the alignment. And I don't want to try to explain it. Can you explain what you say about the third eye? Because it's a part of your book. It's a smaller part. It's not one of the core aspects, but it was something I found very interesting.
Right. Well, it's a very important part to understand because, again, our body is an electrical system and it's controlled by our mind. Okay. Our brain, which has left and right hemispheres. And that's kind of like the brain is like the motherboard. But on the motherboard of that computer, we have what's called a harmonic generator. And in the case of the brain, people, nonchalantly refer to it as the third eye without really understanding what the third eye is. Mm-hmm. It's not just the pineal gland. That's only one part of it. It's a triad. You have the pineal gland, pituitary gland, and the thalamus. And they each function a little bit differently. And when I refer to a harmonic generator, you have a capacitor, you have a resistor, and an inductor. And that relates to our functionality as thought, decisions, and emotions. So, again, that's kind of like a circuit within our electrical circuit because they're constantly seeking balance. Before we make a decision and take action, we're getting this feedback, emotionally through our thought processes. So that's how that actually works. So your emotions feed into your thought process, where it's kind of filtered, and then we decide or act upon that. So again, that's what the third eye really does. And when we're meditating, what we're trying to do is harmonize, get the vibration within, using a mantra or a prayer, to get the vibration in our mind so that these aspects of our brain begin to resonate. And as they resonate, that helps to align our mind with our body and therefore our spirit. And again, from an alchemical or symbolic perspective, that's why we see, like on the symbol of Philosopher's Stone, you'll see the triangle in the center. And that represents our third eye, of course. And we see that in many symbol representations. But then around that, oftentimes you'll see a circle, which represents our spirit. Sometimes, and the correct way is that within or outside of that circle containing the triangle is a square. So alchemically, you'll hear references to squaring the circle. The square represents our body. The spirit is represented by the circle, and our mind is represented by the triangle. So what you're finding here in that symbol is that the circle, which is never ending, is binding our mind to our body.
Yeah. Fascinating, man. Thank you. It's a question that always pops into my mind when I'm reading texts that talk about this lost wisdom and this lost understanding is why? Like, how did it get to this point? Because the things that you're saying now, you studied these teachings, which are already esoteric, but even the people who were studying them didn't fully understand them. So you went and dove down and really tried to understand what are these actually saying in a pragmatic sense, and which is what's so fascinating about your book. But I always end up asking myself, how did we arrive? Like, if this knowledge, this wisdom is so important, which I agree that it is, how did we lose it? Like, how did we get to this point where somebody has to do a deep dive and bring it back for us and explain it to us over the years? How was it lost?
Well, a lot of it, and I'm just going to be very blunt, has to do with institutional agendas. And I would prefer not to go down that rabbit hole.
Okay.
No,
yeah,
but you understand where I'm coming from.
right.
But yeah,
And I don't want to push you into conspiratorial territory, so I understand your hesitance.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was generally wondering what you thought about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're asking why it was lost, yeah, it's because, institutional agendas control the hearts and mind of men. And folks inherently will do what someone whom they respect or feel is authoritative, insists that they do. They will believe what they're told to believe, and, as that continues on, we find that it's a matter of programming or indoctrination.
Right.
So I'll leave it at that.
Right. Yeah. No, understandably, I get it. And I was actually hesitant. I was like, hey, do I want to ask him this question? It wasn't so long ago I wouldn't even hesitate, but now we've reached such a strange point in history. It's like I understand people's hesitation to get into anything of that sort. But so all right, so there's also the oblong square. Mm-hmm. Could you discuss that a little bit? Because that's some wild stuff about the sarcophaguses and such.
Yeah. And that's one of these little gems that's a secret that's hidden. And again, it also incorporates sacred geometry in order to figure it out. And it's referred to in Masonry. I believe it's in the Entered Apprentice degree. And we could describe it in that regard. But it's kind of very vague. There's no clear-cut answer as to what this oblong square is. So, and that's one of the questions I had when I first entered Mason. Well, what is this thing? And you're told, well, yeah, it's the lodge and it's in the ritual, well, it's not really, or the lectures. But, no one can really explain what it was. So in my investigations, I've discerned that there's 3 variations of it. One variation of an oblong square is if you take 2 squares and join them. And that way the sides have a 2-to-1 ratio. So it would be an oblong, but it's comprised of squares. Another version is, I'm having a bit of a brain cramp here, so bear with me.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah, I forget off the top of my head what the second one is. It'll come to me here probably once we move past it.
Yeah.
But the one that most folks that you can find representations of, it's interesting in that you find again within Masonry reference to a point within a circle. Everything begins at that point. So if you take a piece of paper and you draw a circle around a point, or you can take a pair of dividers or compasses and inscribe a circle, you will have this point in the center of it. If you take on either side of that circle and inscribe squares so that the perimeter of those circles intersect the point of the first one, you find that you've got now 3 circles and 2 Vishapices. What you do at that point is you put a square around that center circle and erase the internal part of it. Okay. And what you'll find is it looks just like a racetrack. Like if you're going to college or high school, you go out to the track, it'll look just like that. Okay. It creates a racetrack formation. Well, what I found interesting is that if you're looking at the cartouches of ancient Egypt, they all use this oblong square formation. And generally speaking, the bottom portion of that oblong square is squared off. It's cut off. It's not rounded. And that's what the cartouches look like. And curiously, I found that if you're looking at the ground plans for the ancient cathedrals, for example, like Notre Dame in Paris or Chartres, their floor plan uses this same model. And it's actually the same premise or same idea if you're looking at a Shiva Lingam stone from India. It's all the same formation. So then, I get into it and I discuss it in more greater detail within the book. But that's just an overview of really what it is. I still can't recall what that second variation is off the top of my mind.
I wish I could, because I read the book again this morning as I was taking my notes, and unfortunately I don't remember it either. But that's really interesting stuff you talk about in there, and including, actually, no, this was in the paper, not in the book, where the discussion about time travel, right?
Right. That's in the separate paper.
Okay.
Which is something I'm investigating that goes well above and beyond what's in the book here.
Right.
Because it involves quantum physics, mathematics, and all that kind of good stuff.
Right. No, yeah, that's fascinating, man. I'll be looking forward. Do you plan on doing another book on that topic, or?
It will be, I'm looking at incorporating it into another book.
Okay.
Actually, it'll be a book on the Templars because it does have an application.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh man, that'll be fascinating stuff. That'll be really good stuff. So, in my mind, I've twisted up some of your paper with the book, which I apologize for, because as I'm looking at my questions, I realize I've got them twisted up a little bit. But what you mentioned, no, actually, what I would like to go into. So in my experience, people who are interested in these topics tend to branch in one or two ways. They go that like shamanistic way, which is more of like a natural, intuitive connection with the spirit world. And as you referred to it earlier, more of the feminine side. And then you have people who gravitate more towards like the ritual side of things, and they tend to be more, it's in my experience, more analytical. And the two worlds don't really overlap, and a lot of times they are in conflict with each other. Like I've talked to some people from that more ritualistic, intellectual side who think shamanism is basically a bunch of nonsense. But your book, a very interesting thing about it is that you go into both worlds and you discuss them as just two sides of the same, or two faces of the same coin. And so can you go a little bit into the story of your shamanistic experience in the mountains, which is a really beautiful part of your book?
I'd be glad to. What would you like to know?
Well, could you just tell a little the basic backstory of it for the people who haven't read the book yet?
Sure. Okay, growing up, I always had this affinity for nature. And I was one of these guys that was out in the woods all the time, getting in trouble, chasing, birds, frogs, snakes, the whole nine yards, And it was just the way I grew up. I guess a lot of kids today aren't able to do what we used to do. But so, I've always had this affinity for nature. And I guess it was in 2004. Well, actually, 2004, I was raised up as a master mason. And shortly after that, I was involved with a birding group that was assisting a town put on a migratory bird festival. We were referred to a place called Ravens Ridge to talk to the owner up there about possibly bringing folks up to see some of the birds. So we had gone up there to meet with Charles and obtained his permission to scout around to see what kind of birds he had up there. And he had some really interesting high elevation warblers. So he gave us permission to bring a few groups up during this birding festival. Well, as it turns out, Charles resided at the top of a mountain, and I lived below him in the valley at the base of the mountain. And he suggested, he said, hey, since we're neighbors, why don't you just, come on up tomorrow, just you and me, and we'll visit. And that's how it began. All we did, was just walk around the mountain and talk. We looked at birds. We discussed plants. I had a pretty good background within, plants to begin with. So a lot of the plants that we were discussing, I already knew, but there was quite a few that I didn't know. And those that I didn't, he would share his knowledge about them with me. We would look at the rocks and things up there, animal tracks, all kinds of insects, bugs, any kind of a critter that happened to be running around.
Right.
And, we would just have these conversations, just two guys up on the mountain. We were never on a trail or anything, just walking around, being friends, having discussions about nature, because it's what we had in common. And slowly he began to bring me into this shamanistic training, and initially I had no idea what it was, who he was, or what he was really doing, until I was very well into it. And he would send me out, and I wouldn't say they were quests, but they were little jobs to go find things and maybe take a picture of it or come back and describe it to him. But to go out and seek and find things on my own based on just a very brief description from him. He would say, well, yeah, there's something down the mountain over there. I need you to go look at it, check on it for me, or maybe bring it back. Just something that seemed rather innocuous, no big deal. But as our friendship progressed, this training progressed as well. And then all of a sudden one day it dawned on me, so there's a little something more going on here. But we would never talk about it. It was just something that we did. And that's how it was. I mean, our relationship was fairly unique in that I shouldn't say we didn't. We very rarely talked about ourselves personally, either one of us for that matter. Our whole rapport, our relationship was nature-based. And he was teaching me all the time. Every little thing he did was a lesson to be learned, whether it was an introduction to grandmother spider or, going on an actual vision quest, which I did several times. And he would test me on things, whether it was remembering some of the old stories, being able to identify an animal's track or what it had been eating through its scat, the use of the plants, how to identify them through the different seasons, the best time to grow and harvest, looking at the weather, looking at the sky, at night and the stars. And his lessons were always communicated with stories, which is what I try to share in the book. So it contrasted greatly with the analytical aspect, the detail of an alchemist that you find in the second part of the book, and which is very masculine or left brain oriented, because the shamanistic training, as you mentioned, was very right brain, very feminine, very nature based. And that experience helped me a great deal in that previously I had done very well esoterically as an occultist, but I got to this plateau. And for any of you out there that have practiced it, you can progress, you can get so far, and you think you're doing great, and you know a whole lot. And you get to this one point, and it seems, regardless of what you do, you just can't advance, and it becomes quite frustrating. And I had gotten to that point right after I had become a Mason, at about the time that I met Charles. And through the shamanistic training, he was able to help me align my right brain with my left brain. In other words, become, enhance feminine aspects by using nature to provide balance, which was lacking, just being pure occultist. And that's the beauty of the whole thing. It's called the union of opposites. Because with the union of opposites, if you're familiar with the seven principles of the chameleon,
Yeah.
one of them, which you've got the mentalism, you've got gender, you've got correspondence, cause and effects, yada yada. But the whole idea here is to be able to achieve equilibrium, to attain a balance through harmony. So what Charles was teaching me through the shamanic method was to try and find balance, to try and find that harmony, because the spiritual path of a shaman is harmony in nature. So he was teaching me to apply that to myself as well. So in so doing, I was able to find a greater degree of balance within myself and with what I was doing in my life, because I wasn't just so male oriented, so detail oriented. I had to broaden my perspective, broaden my mind, broaden my vision to be able to see beyond who I am right here in front of you. He was teaching me how I had to look beyond myself, which, to put that in perspective to you, to give it an idea esoterically, is that when we are looking at ourselves as individuals, we're considered as a microcosm. Okay. He was teaching me to look beyond myself to the broader universe, the microcosm. So from an occultist perspective, you often hear, a microcosm within the macrocosm. So that's what occurred by the melding of both the left and the right brain, by being able to understand and use the alchemical aspects, which were very detailed, and blend that with the feminine aspects, the nature-based of shamanism. So it provided harmony and also my ability to see beyond myself, to see beyond. And another esoteric term is to see beyond the veils.
Do you think that he picked up somehow that you were a seeker? Like you'd think he had to have some inkling or some idea of it in order to start teaching you these little lessons.
I would say so, because when you meet someone and have an interaction, you get some impression, an idea. Okay, well, who is this person about? Whether it's their way of speaking, it's their way of acting, but you get some impression about this person. I don't know what it was about, with me, with Charles, other than the first day that I went up there. And again, this is mentioned in my book. I had just been raised up about 3 months before as a master mason, and I was wearing a master mason's ring. And he saw that, and he said a little something about it, that his father had been a mason, but he wasn't. But he said that masons were good people, but I still had a lot to learn. That was my first lesson.
That's really cool. Yeah, I love that part of the book. That could be a book in itself. And he sounds like such a neat guy.
Oh, he was. And it was just a privilege to be able to know him. Unfortunately, he's moved on. He died in a car accident back in 2006, almost 3 years after we had met. But he left quite a legacy. And I didn't realize the lives of how many people he touched until we had his memorial service. And I kid you not, I think it was held in November, and it was cold and raining, and literally hundreds of people showed up. And I can tell you many stories about him. His wife could tell you many, many stories. He was just a very quiet, humble person that he just enjoyed taking care of other people, helping others without the expectation of any acknowledgement or recognition or reward.
Hmm.
That was just who he was. And, just to be in the presence of someone like that it's a privilege. It's very, very special.
Hmm. Yeah, that comes through in the book. That whole section is it's touching. I mean, it's fascinating and interesting, but your affection for him, and it really comes through. And it's not just about it's not just the story of your life and your thoughts, but it's kind of like an homage to him. Yeah, I thought that part of the book was very beautiful writing. So something I love in your book is you talk about, this came to mind because you were just talking about his passing away. You talk about how we shouldn't, as hard as it can be, shouldn't really mourn death because people aren't really dying. They're just like going somewhere else, right? Because life always continues. And that's obviously a beautiful notion and a good reminder, because it hurts when people that we care about die. But I'm curious, because you openly talk about, obviously, reincarnation in the book. But and you may have mentioned this in the book, I'm sorry if I just didn't pick up on it, but you clearly discuss reincarnation. But do you think it's like in a Buddhist sense, where you can escape the cycle of reincarnation through enough understanding and enlightenment, to use the simple term for it?
I don't know from the Buddhist perspective, but the thing is if you can understand the cycles of nature, it requires birth, life, death, and of course rebirth. And Einstein captured that in his theory of general relativity, where it stated that energy can neither be created or destroyed. And then we move into the law of thermodynamics there with the law of entropy, which I'm not going to go into. Okay. But the whole idea there, in the easiest way I can explain it to where it would make sense, is, and I use this example in the book, where if you have a glass of water and you drop that glass and the glass breaks, well, what becomes of it? As the glass, those shards of glass, do they just disappear? What happens to them? Oh, well, you might pick them up and throw them in the trash and it gets carried off to the landfill or whatever. Ultimately, at some point in time, those glass shards are reconstituted. They're made into something else. Okay. The same thing with the water. What happens to the water? Just because you drop the glass, which is the vessel, our bodies, for example, what becomes of the water? Well, the water, it can be absorbed, by the floor, the carpet, the dirt. It could be, you may have taken a few drinks out of it. It might be licked up by your dog. Ultimately, at some point in time, it too gets recycled. It gets reused. It gets repurposed. And yeah, it might end up going, if you wring out a rag after you've sopped up the water, it could end up going down to the sewer system, redistributed or reused for drinking, or it may end up ultimately going out to a stream, to a river, or out to the oceans. But at some point in time, that water gets evaporated and it goes up to the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And when it does, it comes back down. Whether it's as a liquid, whether it's vaporous like a fog, or solid such as ice and snow, it will return to the earth.
Mm.
So that's what we're looking at here. Our body is about 70% water. So when we die, do we really go away? No. We could get buried or we can get cremated. Our body, physical body, is repurposed. But what about our spirit? What about our mind? That's where the energy lies. That too gets repurposed. At some point in time, it goes to the sky. And at some point in time, it's going to return to the earth. Mm. And that's how we can look at, the cycle of being born, existence, our lives, and then death. Those are just temporary because we get recycled and we will return to the earth. I mean, you could say, well, our bodies, our lives are like an hourglass. And the sands of time, you take an hourglass and you set it down, and you'll see that the sands that are in the top represent, all these moments of the past, and they slowly come down to a choke point where they just barely trickle through, and they fall into the abyss of the future. But when the sands are out of that hourglass, the time is up. Hmm. And that's how some folks look at, life and death. Hmm. But it doesn't work like that, because nature is an ongoing cycle. What nature does is it will repurpose. It'll take that hourglass and just flip it back over, and the time starts all again.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. Do you have you ever studied Emanuel Swedenborg at all?
I'm familiar with him.
Yeah, he has an interesting perspective on it, that you don't always reincarnate back into this world. You can reincarnate into like a higher spiritual realm, which would be like the realm of the angels, basically. And but the reason why I asked that initial question is because Kurt Vonnegut, in one of his writings, issued a perspective that I found kind of depressing. As somebody, I'm very grateful for life, and I haven't had an easy life. I understand life is hard, and I've seen the horrible side of life. I'm still grateful for life. I'm grateful for my friends and family. I think it's a beautiful thing, and I am blessed to have been able to enjoy this journey. But Kurt Vonnegut had a different perspective, because Kurt was a very pessimistic, cynical guy, and he said that he found he was hilarious, but he was a very cynical guy. And he found the idea of eternity to be like horrible. Like, he was like, can I just sleep forever? Like, can I just never come back here? And I actually, a friend of a friend a couple weeks ago expressed the same opinion. He said, coming back for eternity sounds exhausting to me. I'd rather just go away. And to me, that's kind of a depressing perspective, but I can understand. I can see where people are coming from, because life can be extremely difficult. And so I actually forget initially what my question was going to be, but it was looping back to what we were just talking about with the reincarnation. Oh, it was about escaping the cycle of reincarnation, because some people view the cycle of reincarnation as kind of like a prison. And it's something.
Yeah, I don't. Kurt Vonnegut's one of my favorite authors.
Oh, really? Really?
I cut my teeth on him when I was really young. He and quite a few others. Herman Hesse.
Oh yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Narcissus.
All those guys. Yeah. Narcissus and Goldman, Steppenwolf, the whole nine yards. But yeah, I loved Kurt Vonnegut, his character Kilgore Trout.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I think I don't recall the title of the book off the top of my head, but memory seems to suggest that it had to do with Kilgore Trout being placed in an alien zoo or something along that line, which isn't all that surprising. I mean, who's to say that if we're repurposed or reincarnated, however you could like to turn it. Who's to say that, we're going to return to this earth, that it's not someplace else or somewhere else, whether it's a different dimension, a different planet, different galaxy, whatever. Who's to say?
Right.
For all we know, with regard to the folks that have already cycled through here, they may look at our life here on Earth as hell. It's
right.
It's a matter of perspective.
Right. No, yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And that's why I can sympathize with people of that perspective, although I find it kind of sad, because it's like, man, all the people that your friends and family, you're not grateful that you got to spend time with them, I mean, I don't know, it seems like pretty a gift to me. But
Yeah, I recall a scene in the movie 7 Years in Tibet with Brad Pitt, and they were excavating a site. I forget what he was having them build, but the Buddhist monks were out there and they were a little upset, and he couldn't understand why they weren't working. And it turns out that in their digging, they had encountered earthworms. So they were digging very carefully and taking each earthworm very carefully and respectfully and relocating it.
that's
So,
amazing.
yeah, because they and what they told him is, well, you don't know if this earthworm is your grandmother or your grandfather or an ancestor. You must respect them,
Hmm.
and show them kindness and not just chop them up.
Right. Yeah, I mean it'd be profoundly difficult to function that way, but that's a really beautiful notion. Then he comes in and like, can we reincarnate as plants? Like I've actually asked myself that sometimes. Well, can I come back as a plant? Because then if we're then even eating plants, we're killing potentially killing reincarnated souls,
All right. So here's a question for you. Most folks get hung up on the idea, we could say reincarnation, but we can also say someone is reborn, or and what's the difference? If a rebirth, or resurrected, I should say. The two terms I'm looking at are rebirth and resurrection.
Right.
A rebirth isn't necessarily coming back as the same person or the same form of being that we are today. It's a misconception. You can come back as we were talking, you can come back as an earthworm. You might come back as a human. You could come back as an elephant or a plant, a rock for that matter. That's what rebirth means. Resurrection, that's something entirely different.
Right.
Resurrection means that this body, this entity, has been resuscitated. In other words, it's had life breathed back into it. It's like if you drown, someone comes along and pulls you out, and they do the whatever it's called on you. You're resuscitated. You get all that bad water out, and you're brought back to life. Even though you may have died, you haven't been reborn. You are given a second chance. You are resuscitated. So there's a lot of confusion between those two terms.
Right.
Reincarnation, I think, is an extension of rebirth, because it does not define what you are reborn as or reincarnated as.
Yeah, it's funny. I just had flashed this memory, this Bob Dylan interview that I read a couple of years ago, where somebody had found some old biker named Bob Dylan, literally named Bob Dylan, who had died in I think the 40s or the 50s or something. And Dylan was playing with the idea that he was the transmogrification of this guy, and the reporter had asked if he was the transmutation or something, and Dylan, in his typical manner, is lecturing this guy about the difference between transmogrification and transmutation, and it just really cracked me up, man. I thought it was funny because he always likes to toy with reporters, and it was amusing to me. But so we're coming up on the end of the hour, Richard. This has been awesome. I so appreciate this time. The question I'd really like to ask before we sign off, except of course I'll ask for whatever. It's always good to end with a plug, so I'll ask whatever other projects you have going. But something I do want to ask is, everybody who's in this weird tribe of seekers, these people who are drawn to look for these answers that most people don't care about. as we all know, it's just something that's just in you, right? It's just like very young. You just feel this call. And so as somebody who has invested so much time and energy into exploring this and has brought this wisdom back for us, which I personally appreciate. If you're talking to a younger person who's earlier on the journey, what would you say to them as they're beginning to explore these strange questions? What would you say to them as advice to maybe expedite their journey, or to just give them some an emotional oasis as they go into this weird wilderness?
Okay, well, I can answer that and allude to the book at the same time. The book is broken out in three parts: bell, book, and candle. In the bell, we are answering the call as an initiate, the young person, the fool, okay, who decides he's going to set out on this path as an adventure. And he really doesn't know much. He's oblivious to what's going on. And if you're familiar with the tarot, it's the zero card, okay, which is never ending. So, the fool, the young person, is answering the call, answering the bell to go out and to begin his seeking, whether it's a quixotic quest or not. Well, that's always to be determined. As he progresses down this road, it begins to narrow, and the path just increasingly narrows as he seeks knowledge. It becomes more and more difficult to find. The road becomes rougher. It becomes treacherous. He encounters folks along the way that don't like what he has learned thus far. They don't like what he's doing, going out and asking questions and is searching for knowledge. So the young man has, been reading a lot, not just a book, but many books in his quest for knowledge. And he's learned so far that he must be circumspect. He has to be very cautious with whom he shares his knowledge with and whom he discusses these things with. So you begin as a fool, you oblivious to all the dangers, but as you progress down this narrowing road, you learn pretty quickly that, well, I need to pay attention. I need to be careful because incidents happen, and if you're not careful, they could end your life one way or another. But for those that continue along this ever narrowing, increasingly difficult, steep, and rocky path up to the top of the mountain, you'll find that there's a hermit up there holding a lantern up high, the number 9 card in the tarot deck. And he's just trying to shine a light, for these young men that are coming along the path, regardless of where they're at along the path, just to show a light saying, hey, here's the top of the mountain. It's the mountain of knowledge. And the light that he's showing is the wisdom that can be attained once you get there. It's, the flower of wisdom that Charles taught me to seek up on the mountain.
Man, Richard, that was beautiful, man. I can't believe you just improv that. that was like the most amazing answer that anybody could have given in that precise moment. That was incredible. So we're coming at the end of the hour. So can you share what other projects you would have, anything related to the book, if you're going to be doing any kind of signings or anything like that, but also any other work that you have going on?
Well, I've got signings coming up. I'm always available for interviews, for book signings. If you need a speaker for an event, they can either contact you or get a hold of me. And I think you've got my contact information.
Yes,
my
sir.
website's under construction. Hopefully it will be up on July 1st, but we'll see. As far as other projects, yeah, I'm working on something that is pretty revolution and pretty massive. We touched on it earlier. I'm digging really deep into what the philosopher's stone really is. In the Alchemical Search for the Unified Field, I'm only touching on one aspect of it. But if you're looking at it from the perspective of a geometric model using Platonic solids, which I discussed in the paper, you can also find that it will provide a potentially, okay, my quantum physics are right, a vehicle for travel in the space-time continuum. And beyond that, it appears to be a mathematical model for virology for a biophagous organism, which were the primary source for DNA replication within the primordial seas. In other words, if you take that and you look at these Platonic solids in concert with the oblong square that we talked about earlier, you'll find that it could be used as a vehicle for panspermia. In other words, for feeding life on distant planets. And the interesting thing about that is that's what's happened here on Earth. It's very clear. People say, "Oh, what about life, beyond Earth?" Well, if you talk to any scientist, you'll find out that a lot of the meteorite activity or the asteroid activity that enters into the Earth has these biophagous organisms on them, and that's that they're bringing it to Earth. And that's how life essentially got started. So, with that in mind, if these are an organism, a biological organism, that in itself tells us that yes, there is life somewhere beyond us.
Right.
And the question is was Earth, did Earth experience panspermia? Are we a result of that over time or not? But setting that project aside, I'm also looking at the Knights Templar, their involvement with the quest for the treasure of Solomon's Temple, Ark of the Covenant. That is proving to be very interesting. And I'll leave you with one little teaser of a question to look at. The question, if you want to understand the modus operandi of the Knights Templar, you have to be able to answer the question, who Hughes de Paynes really was. That's a question that has not been touched on in anything that I've read. You just can't accept what's out there because it's all regurgitated and coffee stained from somewhere else, and it's unsourced. So if you can determine who Hughes de Paynes really was, then you will understand the Templars.
Man, I will be eagerly awaiting that work, man. And actually, one quick thing: to the viewers, everything will be linked in the description box below this video to go to get the book, etc., etc. But the paper that you shared with me, is that publicly available anywhere?
No, it's not.
Okay.
That will be incorporated as part of a book down the road.
Okay.
But if you have folks that you feel using your discretion and judgment might benefit from it, you can share it. But I just don't want to, plaster it out there in a public forum right now.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's good to know. That's really good to know.
Because it's pretty high level stuff.
Right. Yeah. No, I love it. It's fascinating. I've read it a couple of times. I'll be digging in more this weekend. It's good stuff. But all right, Richards, thank you so much for your time, man. I love the book. I appreciate what you've put out there and the knowledge that you've shared. And I look forward to talking to you again. I hope we can do this again.
Well, it would be, an honor and pleasure to be able to come back and visit with you and your audience in the future.
Awesome, man. Thank you, Richard. And R.E. Kretz.